Hi, I'm your podcast host, Ashley Turek, and this is your fourth episode where we talk about the cost of change in California's most beloved city, San Francisco. Today, our special guest feature is Patrick Otellini, longtime resident of San Francisco and national director of affordable housing at Swinerton, one of the largest construction companies in the country. Um, Hi, Patrick.
Hi, Ashley. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you for taking the time out of your day to join in on this episode. Could you start off by introducing yourself and the work you do at Swinerton?
Sure. So I'm Patrick Otellini. I'm our National Affordable Housing Director at Swinerton Builders, and I oversee the affordable housing work that the company does as one of our core markets. We build across several different types of markets in terms of what we build.
Mhm.
But being a very old construction company founded in 1888, we're a bit unique because we are employee owned. We're 100% employee owned, and so that really changes the way that everyone kind of works and kind of comes together as a team within the Swinerton family.
Right. That's great. Can you share what first inspired you to join Swinerton?
Yeah, I went on my first Swinerton project site when I was 20 years old, and I was an intern working for a consulting firm that was working on a Swinerton project.
Yeah.
During that time, I got to meet a lot of great builders in San Francisco, and there are a lot of great builders. But Swinerton is one that I always held in high esteem. One that I always really maintained close relationships with. I thought of them as a builder with integrity. And after working in city government for 5 years, when I had the opportunity to move to Swinerton, which was about 10 years ago. It was not even a question in my mind. I knew I wanted to be there.
That's great. You mentioned that Swinerton is entirely employee owned. What do you think are the biggest benefits of being an employee owned company?
Mainly because we control our own destiny. As an employee-owned firm, we have full transparency into where the money goes, and the reality is that money and our profits goes right back to us as owners and as employees. So that's something instead of seeing it just go to a small group of owners within a company, which traditionally how construction firms are set up. We really have the ability to not only see what's happening, but help control that outcome.
Yeah, that's great. Um, would you say that being an employee-based company, that there's a level of empathy that you see in your workers, on how they go about projects?
Absolutely. And that's just part of our culture at Swinerton. There is a deep culture of community service, of volunteering, of giving back and being invested in the communities that we serve. And that happens all across the company and across the country. So it's really exciting to see that when we're in different cities and whether that's hosting a Saturday skills fair where we're teaching kids how to pour concrete, or whether that's we're walking into a classroom and talking to kids about, future careers in engineering. That looks very different across the country, but the reality is that we're local at heart and we're very much invested in the communities that we serve.
Besides being an employee-based company and being, as you said, very invested in the companies you serve, what would you say is another unique aspect of Swinerton that you don't find in other construction companies?
Our ability to innovate, by having women and men that are in the trades as a self-performing general contractor, we are in touch with what is happening on our job sites every day. And
Mhm.
being able to innovate around not only worker safety, but around worker productivity and material usage. Our adoption of mass timber manufacturing over the last several years has really kind of opened up the door for us in seeing what the future of construction really does look like through
Mhm.
materials like mass timber that are readily renewable.
Right. That's definitely probably a big factor in making this affordable housing sustainable. Would you say that there's other strategies that Swinerton goes by that really helps in making affordable housing?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, our job is to really deliver excellent work for our client that they know what they're paying for and they know when they're going to receive it. So that's really in terms of de-risking the construction process, it's all about starting and understanding the client's needs and goals. And
Mhm.
that may be something that leads them to a more sustainable structure. It may be something that leads them to a more durable, more resilient structure. It's really going to be dependent on the needs and pressures of the particular project. And that's what we want to do. We don't want to go there and say, this is what we build, this is how you build it. We want to understand how do we deliver an excellent building for you as a developer.
Yes. In terms of San Francisco, since that's the main topic of the podcast, I know that you have a very big role in San Francisco and developing affordable housing in the city, since housing is such a large issue. There's barely any space to house all the people, especially all the homeless people on the streets. So, from your perspective, how would you say that affordable housing is an issue in cities like San Francisco?
I mean, affordability is an issue in every American city, in my opinion. It's
Yes.
just a matter of how exasperated that issue and that problem is. And San Francisco is about the craziest place you'll ever see in terms of how much that impacts affordability all the way down the line.
Mhm.
And the reality is that we have had such a widening gap of inequality around housing options and housing affordability that there are multiple solutions that we need to be seriously invested in, seriously diligent about to be able to create the ecosystem of all types of housing that we need to have a community thrive. It needs to be treated more like infrastructure and less like one-off developments. Housing is a very important critical infrastructure for any kind of healthy community, and we need to sort of think about it a little differently than we traditionally have.
Right. What would you say are some of these solutions you're working on specifically?
Well, the innovations around interim transitional housing has been really eye-opening to me because when we're building those communities, those aren't permanent housing. Those are temporary communities that are going to be there for 4 to 6 years, and we're getting people off the streets into a dignified situation where they have a bed, a desk, a door, and a lock. And
Mhm.
to be able to deliver projects like that at essentially a tenth of the cost of a unit of when we're building permanent affordable housing is really interesting to me because I'm seeing that space and that need for how we have to think more dynamically about what we've considered housing. Building permanent affordable housing is incredibly important. I don't want to discount that, but it's very hard to say that that's our only solution when people are dying on the streets every day. There needs to be a more dynamic and more humane way to approach it.
Definitely. Would you say that Swinerton has generally positive outcomes with um, intertransitional housing? And what would you say is a general percentage of the homeless population who has benefited and been taken out of the streets?
So through our work with a really important client, a nonprofit called Dignity Moves, who has really challenged how to get people off the streets efficiently and humanely and effectively, we've worked with them all over the state of California over the last 4 years to add more than 700 units of interim transitional housing. So to be able to build that at that scale that quickly, and that houses probably around 1,500 individuals because many of these cohabitate in a single unit. And so that's something where we really see that impact. But there's nothing better, whether it's a brand new high rise that we're building or an interim transitional community, watching people move into their homes, watching people move into these buildings that we've built
Yeah.
is such an amazing feeling. It's you're seeing them get home, and that's so important.
Right. And a home is vital to a community. It is so hard to feel like an active member of a community when you're on the streets and you don't have a place that feels like home. You don't have a place where you can really advance in the city.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, in terms of really deeply understanding the housing crisis itself, I know that housing affordability can be perceived as a negative thing. How would you explain to a high school student how we can reframe that and think of housing affordability as very beneficial to society?
Yeah, there's a misconception out there that for some reason the affordable housing that's being built in our communities is somehow substandard or somehow less than it built at a lesser quality. And the reality is that these projects are built exactly the same way. If anything, we actually have more quality standards associated with affordable housing. So the argument falls apart to me when people try to claim that they don't want this type of project in their neighborhood because the way the design standards are set, they're beautiful buildings. And so while that does mean they cost more, I mean that's part of the idea is these projects look exactly like their counterparts on the market rate side. And so the fact that all we're trying to do is create places for families to live, places for seniors to live, places for our workforce to live,
Mhm.
that I think that's amazing. And so when you start to see people in the community that are against this type of development, it usually harkens to a motive that's other than what it claims to be. There's
Mhm.
usually folks that don't want people that don't look like them in their communities or something along those lines, which historically has been a really terrible practice in real estate development. So trying to undo a lot of those wrongs from the past is something that we focus on diligently, and I think it's really important.
Do you think that this issue kind of relates to the districts in San Francisco and how each specific district houses a specific demographic? Do you think that that relates to gentrification and how other people are coming in and disrupting the culture?
I think gentrification can be terrible in communities. And
Right.
gentrification is what happens when you build without improving the lives of the community around it. And so that's really the importance of the work that community development organizations play. When community development is at work, you're actually improving the lives of the community and the real estate at the same time. And that's when you lessen the impacts of gentrification. But the reality is those have to harmonize together because you can't upend a community in the way that you're erasing culture, the way that you're erasing history and past. But
Yeah.
you also can't pretend that you can't add new housing units because guess what? We didn't close the doors on the city. People still want to live here. It's still a fantastic place to raise a family. And so to be able to have opportunities for that, the only answer to that is to build more housing available to people of all income levels.
What would you say are specific strategies that Swinerton uses to balance the need for more housing, but also preserving the culture of San Francisco?
A lot of times it's designing with an architect that really is culturally competent. That's probably the most important part. As a contractor, frankly, we can't really take a lot of credit for that.
Yeah.
But what we can take credit for is engaging with the local community and providing opportunities to put the community to work on our projects. We employ lots of small, local, diverse businesses through suppliers and subcontractors that we work with. And so that's to us is really where we start to see the impact of our community-minded efforts paying off for us in the construction space.
That's great that you're taking people from the city itself and implementing them into the project because I know that gentrification often affects small businesses who maybe are not high enough up in the rankings to keep their businesses going, especially if it's maybe a family generational business who has been going for so long and they get pushed out. But if you are implementing these people into the projects, I think that would definitely serve very well in keeping these people in the city.
You're absolutely right.
For building affordable housing, what would you say are the main steps that Swinerton takes from taking an empty piece of land to an affordable housing unit?
So our job, when we do our job well, is to come up with a plan so the contractor is really helping support the vision that the owner wants to see developed. And largely that's through close collaboration with the architect.
Mhm.
Architects are great in envisioning how we use a space. Contractors are great on understanding how to build it. And so first and foremost, coming up with a safe job site that people are on and off every single day is the first and foremost thing that we need to think about. But
Right.
from there, it's about creating our plan. We spend a lot of time in our pre-construction thinking to be able to avoid problems that come up as a result of poor planning.
Mhm.
Planning well allows you to execute, and it also gives you certainty through the process. There's part of what we've done for 140 years is be experts at the analytics that are involved in construction staging, scheduling, and worker productivity.
I would imagine that in the over 100 years that Swinerton has been going, that there's definitely been major advancements in its process of building affordable housing. Would you like to go into a little detail about some of these advancements?
Yeah, I mean, back when we started building buildings, reinforced concrete was a brand new material. We were starting to understand technology that was at the cusp of 120 years ago of construction technology.
Hmm.
So I think that's those lessons learned over 100 years have really allowed us to understand not only what we do well, but where it's going in the future. And so to think about the advancements from back in the day where you would have an architect hand drawing a drawing that we would then have to go fabricate the material. Now it's almost like a shopping list of parts and pieces. We know how many parts and pieces we need for this building. And so because we've done this largely in a digital environment, it allows us to execute on the site much more accurately with expert certainty.
And I would imagine that this definitely speeds up the process of making these housing units and to make them very efficiently.
Absolutely. So that's part of what we have to do from a business opportunity because we can't pay ourselves to be on the site forever, right? So
Yeah,
we need to be efficient. We need to get in, do our job and get off with as little drama as possible because that's what allows us to keep our numbers down for the owner who wants to hire us for the next job.
absolutely. You mentioned earlier that partnerships play a big role in Swinerton and how it executes its projects. So, do you think that nonprofit organizations play a major role? And what would you say is that role?
So nonprofits are a really important part of the community development side of what happens in affordable housing. Nonprofits can be affordable housing developers, where they are the developer either purchasing or working with a city to build new housing, but they're also service providers in many cases. And so that service providing nature of those nonprofits is really what allows the service side of it to be so impressively well done. And that's one of the things I love seeing in these developments is how we combine the expertise that's involved in developing a piece of real estate, which is very difficult to do, with the idea of providing services for those folks in their building. And so the best nonprofits are really good at doing both those.
That's great. I think that it's definitely a great balance between more of yeah, the expertise, as you said, but also factoring in the people. And San Francisco is such a progressive city, and obviously many people are very opinionated, and I would think that they want to have their say in these projects. So how do you think that Swinerton um, takes into account the opinions of the public, for example, in San Francisco, and factors that into the process of building these units?
The general public isn't really too involved with what Swinerton does as a community builder. But what is important is understanding the labor environments of where we're at and making sure that the folks that are on our project are being paid every dollar that they deserve to be paid. And so that relationship at the labor level is very important to us because that's something we pride ourselves on. We pride ourselves on that transparency with our partners and how we're able to follow through on our promises as a builder.
Yes, and being employee, 100% employee um, owned, I would think that these relationships definitely get time to develop.
Absolutely. And that's why we spend tremendous amounts of effort and time developing them is because when the project comes around, you want to know your partners have your back.
Yes,
And you don't want to be building those relationships for the first time on a project because that enters a lot of uncertainty into the equation, and that's what kills projects.
I would imagine. As we're running short on time, I just want to close on some discussion on both community impact and how high school students can factor in this conversation into how they think about affordable housing. So, what would you say it truly means for a neighborhood when new affordable housing gets built?
It's what allows our communities to be what they can be at their fullest. A healthy community is filled with a diversity of income levels, with a diversity of people, and to be able to create that in an ecosystem where people have quality, dignified housing options,
Mhm.
that's the ideal. That's the American dream. That's what this country is supposed to be. So I think that work is very important when it's done well.
If you could change one thing about how San Francisco goes about making housing more affordable, what would you suggest?
I would suggest, not that anyone cares what I have to say on the matter, but I would suggest that, us having a realistic way to meet our housing goals. San Francisco has an ambitious plan to get 80,000 units, and they've done some really good footwork in terms of changing zoning, to be able to allow for that, but
Mhm.
it needs to happen still. So they've laid the table. So that part's exciting. But now we need to see execution. And so, that's the thing I would love to see is the city take this challenge seriously and play the role it needs to play to be able to help support the production of new housing units.
In executing this, if it were to happen, what would be your main hope for the future of San Francisco?
That my children who are your age, when they are out of college and looking to buy their first home, that San Francisco isn't immediately a city they have to write off because they can't afford to live here.
Right. That's a great way to put it. And I think that many high school students can relate to the fact that San Francisco is a great destination point, and I would imagine that many people could imagine themselves living in San Francisco in the future. And if this becomes available, that would be amazing.
Well, it's the greatest city in the world, so never write it off.
Yep. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk about gentrification and affordable housing in San Francisco. I really appreciate it, and thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. It was a pleasure.